All right, welcome back, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope the holidays were nice. And I don't exactly know how to start this. I suppose we should get back into discussing technical and goals maybe for 2024. That's what I wrote on the agenda for today. There's also an item from Karen, which is kind of the same idea, strategic ideas to pursue within OCP. So just want to open the floor and maybe get some opinions on what we should pursue for this year.
Yeah, we had an action item from before the break. Not that anyone remembers that to go over the HWI. Kieran was going to present that, but like most of the team, he's out sick today. I can take a stab at it if you guys want, or we can wait for Kieran to get back. I'm happy to do either.
Is this a different presentation than the one that we had already? Like there was one with an HWI and you talked, I think you were the one who talked about the backends and all of that.
We did. There was an ask to go through like the specifics of what the hardware output and everything looks like. But if there's not a pressing need for it, we'll just wait for Kieran. He did create a doc, but I don't want to steal his thunder.
Yeah, we can wait. I don't think it's like it's all kind of going slow, right? It's the beginning of the year, so.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, nobody's raising any hands, so I'm gonna put you
Adrian,
on the spot, Karen.
yeah. Adrian, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just on the third item that I added, so there is wondering what our goals from 2024 are, but there's also within OCP itself, there's strategic alignment. If there's anything new within OCP that people want to bring up that isn't part of a current program that or that's larger than can fit in what we're currently doing. That's what the third item was.
Do you have any proposals, seed ideas, anything that you've seen that you want to raise up, Karen?
No, not yet. Like internally we had thought maybe Plugfest, but that's one of the things that Microsoft, or sorry, that Meta could be considering. But other than that, there wasn't anything that like I can see from the previous meetings minutes that there was a database of diagnostic runs was one of the things that we mentioned or that Vincent mentioned late on last year. But that would still be within the forum of this group. So there isn't anything new that I can think of here. It's just, has anybody else got something?
All right. So I suppose if anything comes to mind, then just raise a hand and interject at the time whenever that comes up. Maybe it would be useful to have like a status overview of where we're at right now with everything, so we can talk about goals for 2024. So
Yeah.
the last bit that we had as kind of a milestone was technical the OCP summit, and that had some bit of discussion and challenges. But the point was we needed to have like a couple of diags ready by that point and to be able to be demoed. I'm pretty sure we're not exactly done with that yet, but I think 90% of the stuff is done. So I know Igor with Memtester, that's ready for use right now. The set test we already have. PCI LMT works. We're kind of pending on the SSD stuff. I don't know if Venkat is on the call. He is not. I was talking to him earlier. I think that's still pending. And what else was there? the demoing this on HP hardware. I don't know if you wanna talk about that status, Aaron.
Yeah, so we've had some higher priority items over the last quarters in terms of spinning up new instances in Europe and going through some official stuff that will allow us to stay alive from business legal perspective. So I think we are starting to get a good handle on those things, and we are also looking at getting some more resourcing. So hopefully all of that will go well, and we'll be able to still achieve this target within Q1, which is sort of the discussion that Dan and I had before the break, I suspect, or if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Aaron. So the point is, we are 90% there with all of that. Now, given that, there's a couple of things on various agendas in the last couple of weeks before the break that we'll probably get back to. But the question right now that I'm asking is, what would we like to get after we have these couple of demoable diags?
Yeah, I think for me, what we should probably do is start working on the documentation of how do you take these particular diags, right, and then put them together as sort of like a test corpus for OCP hardware. We should probably go and get something from the OCP marketplace, whether that be one of the latest servers, whatever it is, right, and then show, hopefully using Arun's CI, that we've got all the diags running. We're basically able to test that device end to end and then see what gaps we still have. We also have, I'm looking at the Git repo now. It looks like maybe 12 NVMe and SSD diags. And these are using your library, Adrian. They're not using the Google library. And these were developed by one of our CMs. We paid them to do that work so that we didn't have to do it. I need to figure out, like, can we just go ahead and move these up to GitHub? Do we have to keep them here in what we call Git on Borg? Or if we can move them up to GitHub. Sorry, I'm kind of out of it today. I was looking at the license. It looks like they're all MIT licensed, which is good, but they rely on binaries, and I need to check the licensing of the binaries. I don't know if the folks who put this together were thinking about that. So that's one other quick update from us.
I'll quickly interject, Vincent, with a quick thing, if you will. Dan, I would prefer if we just call it the Python API rather than my library, generally speaking, you know. And if are you saying that these diags are coming from devs that are working with your team, right, or with you?
They are. We help them with sort of the templating and things like that. But in this particular case, one of our JDMs developed these diags. They look pretty simple. I mean, they're, like wrappers around, PCI tools and SSD tools and FIO and things like that. But they still look like they're useful. And there's a few AMD diags as well that I've got to admit I'm not familiar with. So I need to check and see what those are.
All right, cool. So if they can be published, we probably should. Go ahead, Vincent. Sorry about that.
No, not a problem. I definitely agree with the direction Dan just outlined. I think they resonate a lot in our space at Meta. I would add maybe a couple things for 2024 in our space is sort of the portability and reuse of those diags in practice between lab, manufacturing, and data center. And I think to that end, we need to do some work on sort of parameterization of the diags and how we share the diags in practice. So even though we have obviously the GitHub repo, the input, going back to sort of the longer discussions we've had in the past on input and parameterization. And going along with that is recording of the output, which we've also discussed in the past, is can we build a sort of shared database of execution or maybe of signatures of failures. And I think that's going to become more relevant when we really want to leverage a vendor or a manufacturer finding an issue with a diag. You know, if any one of our companies runs into an issue, how do we share that? In fact, I had a good discussion internally with somebody who said, "Hey, if we've got a vendor of a component that just ran this diag, why would we rerun it at all? You know, in our integration test." Which is both a little bit naive, but it's a valid question. Like if you're taking the diag as is and you just upstream the component, you have now a record of the component having passed. So you could argue that if this diag runs for 4 hours, you probably don't need to rerun those 4 hours, but you may want to run a different parameterization of the diag. I think that speaks to how do we really have sort of a ledger of history of the component test. And I think it's an opportunity for us in 2024 to make a bit of a dent in that area and contribute that back to OCP. So those are two in addition to what Dan talked about that are on my mind.
Got it. Okay. So Karen has been taking notes of this. Thanks, Karen.
Just in the notes, do you want names of companies or people that have proposed them, or is it okay just to list them as they are, your choice? I've just listed the items.
I would say it may be useful to have some names assigned to them, like the person who proposed the idea, so that we can restart that discussion when the time comes, rather than just throw it in the open.
Yeah, one other thought I had, folks, was to try to make this real. The particular JDM here, obviously I can't name them, but I know that we all use them, right? Or at least I strongly suspect we do. It might not be a bad idea at this point to see if we can engage them jointly. To say, hey, look, we're both 2 of your customers, or 3 of us are your customers, or however many folks we want to get in to say, like, these are the things that we're doing, to try to get them more involved and perhaps get some of their representation here as well, because this can become a differentiator for them business wise as well, if they're going ahead and doing diags and things for us, right? The other piece that I'm working on internally with our data center sort of repair system tools and things like that is to see if we can adapt some of those systems to where they will use serial number as opposed to using this sort of like location ID that we have for certain cases, which would get us out of the need to use a hardware interface at all for many use cases. And then this would simplify diag development as well. We do have the hardware interface. We're debating what we want to do. Kieran and I spoke yesterday about being able to develop diags without it, and this is the one prerequisite we have for that, which I think will make adoption and everything easier. The one thing that I am a little concerned about is now that we have lots of diags, well, not lots, but 12 diags in the Python format, Adrian. The challenge is now that becomes really, really hard for us to move and not change as well, or else we're going to break things, right? I looked at how they're building these things right now, and it looks like they actually are pulling down the OCP library from PyPy, which is cool. It's a good way to do it, but we will need to be very careful on how we version that library and everything going forward now.
Well, what I thought of that is standard SEM versioning. So, you know, anything breaking API is a major version, anything other is a minor or patch. So I don't expect to have any problems in keeping backwards compatibility in that API.
That sounds good. I think maybe my point was, let me up level it a bit. Was now we need to start thinking about some of the boring stuff, right? Like now that it's real, like sustenance and everything else, right?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that could still be added to that implementation. If you encounter specific things that we need to talk about, I mean, right now it sounds to me like it's kind of a heads up rather than anything specific. But if you have stuff coming up later on as stuff are being developed, then put them on a list or put them in a discussion on the GitHub repo, and we'll get to them, right? Okay. Well, if there's nothing else that comes up right now, I do have a question. Maybe we can talk about this for a couple of minutes. The HWI package library, if we want to call it that. At the end of the day, I just want to clarify for myself, maybe, but maybe it's useful for other people as well. At the end of the day, this is kind of an intermediate solution until everything is ready to use Redfish APIs. Would you say that's correct, Dan?
That's what we hope. We are finding some gaps in Redfish right now. Like the Redfish folks have thought about that. You know, you can always extend Redfish through the OEM extensions, obviously, right? But as soon as you do that, it's not really a standard anymore. So we're trying to figure out how to get some of those things that we need in there. The easiest thing is just to change the standard, and so far the DMTF has been very receptive to that. But that is where we want to go.
All right. So I guess the question then is, how much value do we get, or how much risk do we take on by having Diags use HWI right now until we get to that stable point later on? Because it also depends like how far away that point where we can fully use Redfish and nothing else is.
Well, I think for certain things, like SATA disk and things like that, they may never be part of Redfish, right? So those are some concerns where we may never get away with it. What we're doing is we're taking our internal management layer, which, as you guys know, is Jesus, and we're creating what we call an IMA, an in-band management agent, which effectively runs on the host. So it's not out of band on the BMC, but it speaks Redfish. So that way the host node becomes just sort of like another node, so we can fill in some of those gaps. We don't know if there's interest from other parties in doing that, though, right? It's very much a stopgap solution.
But that actually sounds like an interesting idea, like a good idea. Basically, you're extending Redfish by being a proxy.
Pretty much, right? You're creating sort of that translation layer until you get to the promised land, I guess I would say.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, out of the three ways that we have identified in the previous discussions, which were, you know, as a quick refresher, distributing the HWI with the Diag itself, so like an embedded model, or a sidecar model, which is the second one, or a separate service, which is the third one. Do you have any sort of update that you may have discussed internally on this, or did any opinion like change in any way since the last time?
My opinion hasn't changed. Like full disclosure, I think I feel a little bit differently than my team here, and they're smarter than I am, so they're probably right. But I really like the idea of the sidecar, and I think they are leaning towards the idea of embedding it in as a library. The concern I have with the embedding in is the inclusion of the build step, right? I've been going and sort of looking at how widespread Bazel has been adopted by other programs, and it's actually more than I thought, to be honest. Right, there's quite a bit of Bazel out there, particularly in sort of the mobile world, right? For obvious reasons. But it does add one more thing that you need to do or worry about if we make it a library, which it's a sidecar, then it's just it's sort of like calling WMI, right? It's just there on the operating system, right? And you can build it, you can compile it, it will still be open source, right? Like I sort of like this model. And I think it will work well with the folks that are used to our classic way of doing things with Jesus because it's already what they know and love, right? There's already another service there that kind of does this for them. They call it from a diag, but it's not part of their diag. I think my team's main concern is the versioning and all the other stuff that goes along with it, where the diags are no longer hermetic.
Go ahead, Marcus. I'll go after.
I wonder what the impact is on the sidecar versus the embedding and Bazel with the barrier of entry to producing a diag. Some of the examples from the 12 diags we got from our vendor and how quickly they were able to produce a diag, and they're all relatively simple, but it also means that it's really simple for them to, oh, okay, I just grab some Python, I do the thing, I send my commands, and off I go. And compared to, oh no, now you need to set up a Bazel project, and here's build files, and here's another thing you need to learn to just, I was just issuing these 3 commands and parsing the output. And instead, now you've made me do all of this extra work, and it hasn't added a bunch of value. Whereas I think the sidecar of just issue that command and here's the API to it, it feels a lot easier from getting somebody up and going. And so in the sense of tracking with what most of us are used to as far as test engineers and the quality of software awareness, I feel like going down that Bazel route is going to make it just harder and harder to get adoption.
Yeah, I think you've echoed my concerns.
Thanks for that, Marcus. So I prefer the same thing. So I prefer the sidecar option. Now, as I was highlighting in the previous discussion, this does have some, it comes with some extra load on the maintenance side, not on the client side, which is, you have to have a protocol to talk to, you have to have some stable versioning, and it's a bit more work, right? But it does remove it separates the build system, the build step. And talking a bit for meta, I guess, in this case, it would be a lot easier to go with the sidecar route than having to build those dependencies with Bazel. And obviously getting a precompiled thing is kind of out of the question on auditability and stuff that I was mentioning before. That said, I think we can have both of them. Like I said the last time, we can have both tightly coupled to a specific diag and embedded, and the sidecar is just taking the base library code and putting a protocol on top of it. And you call it a sidecar, and you connect through it to it through a socket or something. Go ahead, Khan.
Would it be useful to have the different options and the different approaches you can take when you're using these options, so that someone can have it as a reference if they're starting from scratch?
There's a GitHub discussion already on this. It's just that we haven't reached a conclusion of what exactly we go forward with.
Okay.
I think you may have been out that day, Kieran, but we did have sort of like a pro and con discussion of each approach and sort of where we were thinking and the concerns that people had about different approaches.
So far, I mean, we have three hands here going with the sidecar option. Dan, I think you're saying that the rest of the team there prefers the embedded variant where you don't need to care about the versioning. I guess that's a big benefit there. And instead you have Bazel to build everything in, which is fine. Again, I still think we can have both. But what would you say is blocking us right now from actually publishing this as a separate artifact with this guidance of how to use it?
Yeah, I think it's two things, right? One, at the moment, is we'd have to basically get the capybara stuff all together. Or I'm sorry, let me clarify what that even is. That's the tool that we use to take from our internal code repository out to external systems where we can strip certain things out and things like that. And then ultimately, what we can't do is we can't have something that we maintain externally and something that we maintain internally. One of the biggest challenges we've had so far is even for like the stuff that we've published up on GitHub now, it's effectively kind of dead code because no one can submit, sort of a pull request for it, right? Like if we did get a pull request, we would literally have to take that code, manually merge it back down into our code and then push it back up. Which there's all kinds of things wrong with that model. Like whoever did the code, like they would lose attribution of it, right? Because it would come back through whoever the Google engineer was that pushed it. All those things are things that I think we need to figure out for the HWI. And the other reality is the HWI is enormous, right? Like this is a big giant chunk of code right now. It's got all kinds of Google internal stuff in it and everything else that we would have to pull out. Because we've got several instances where we're in the migration phase from our internal system to Redfish. For the Redfish stuff, we're fine. Everything's open and standard, and there's nothing proprietary there. For the other stuff, there is, and we have a lot of hardware right now that is still sort of using both interfaces. And we've done things to mix it together, so there's a big decoupling that we need to do. I'm actually somewhat of the opinion that it might make sense to just break it up and make a separate external HWI, right? Which we could do in Python, and it would just be easier for everyone, right? Like this might be the way for us to go. And then also, that would truly be owned by the OCP. It might be a better way to do this if we want to go down this route. And then it becomes just a helper library that's there if you want to use it, but if you don't have to use
it. Go ahead, Igor.
Yeah, I think Dan has already said what I wanted to say. So why don't we implement an open source version of HWI in Python? That way we don't need to figure out how to build it, and we don't need to use the sidecar approach. So we do a similar thing that we have with the output library.
Well, yeah. the sidecar, sorry for jumping in, the sidecar aspect is still relevant because Python isn't the only language that we need to support at the end of the day. Like I have gotten requests for Rust, for example, for DIAGs written in Rust. So if it were a sidecar and we can separate the language barrier, I think that still has value.
Do we need a library, output library for Rust, maybe? Because I may be interested in working on it.
It was asked for. If you want, I can connect you to the person who wants that.
I mean, if my management approves it, then yeah, sure.
The problem with that is that we are trying to limit the explosion of API per language, right? So it would be nice to have a single thing with a binding, but that has the issues of enforcing a build system. So it's still kind of a technical problem. The question for you, Dan. I just want to confirm that HWI needs to be able to run native code, because I kind of got that out of the design logic. So you need to talk to various low-level systems. So it's usually easier to like talk C to them. So if that is the case, like if it needs like a kind of a low-level access compilation, is it actually feasible to rewrite that in pure Python?
We can. That is the way it works today, but I don't know that it needs to work that way. I think honestly, most of the other stuff we could get from just kind of walking through /proc and /sys and things like that, if we're talking about only the on-host things. I don't know that we have anything that needs to go down and talk to like device drivers or PCIe maps or anything like that.
All right, so do you think it would actually be easier to have a rewrite for Python than to split whatever code base is right now and make it a separate product, and then have it plug back into the existing diags, on top of having it expand into a protocol-based side to make the sidecar?
I do, but I want to see what the team thinks, right? Like their perspective is a little bit different, even with the sidecar versus library. Like, so much of their life is about, having hundreds of thousands of tests running every day on like a million different software configurations and servers and trying to get all that running, which is why the concept of hermicity is so important to them, right? But for manufacturing, it's not really that way. Things tend to stay more static and things like that. Like, I think it's less important there. So I think it is easier to re-implement it, but I need to get other opinions.
Okay, so we'll wait on that then.
Yeah, ultimately, I will not be the person re-implementing it, right? Which is why I'm hesitant to say yes, it would be easier.
Okay, go Vincent.
So I liked how you started opening that topic, Adrian, around Redfish, and I could see that the thought process was around, do we want to stand by a contribution model within test and validation for hardware abstraction and hardware interfaces? And that's kind of the gist of what I got in your question is, does this team want to support the hardware interface and the contributions made to it? And I think we had a good discussion on this the last meeting or the one before it. We raised a number of issues with the contribution model, right? Because this is a pretty thorny problem. You make one change to a hardware abstraction interface, and you may break your entire production. Obviously, everybody will keep their branches separate, but that does raise some questions. So I do still wonder here whether it's a sidecar service or whether, however way we want to do this, do we want to stand by supporting the hardware interface as part of test and validation? I'm not sure where I stand on this personally. It feels to me like a can of worms.
So one of the questions that Dan had last time, and by the way, I muted you, Dan, your keyboard is loud, was if we have to support this, do we have commitment from everyone involved that this is a thing that will be used? So it's, at the end of the day, it's kind of the same question, like, do we want to support it as a group? But I'm not sure that we have like a good final answer right now on the saying yes, I want to use it in the DIACs and all of that. I can say personally, so not representative of anything, I think this is a good idea to have even as an intermediate until redfish catches up, or if it never catches up, like in the case of SSDs. But that's just my opinion. So we kind of need more from the actual users, manufacturing, for example, you Vincent, or NTI or stuff like that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and to also nuance a little bit what what I was trying to say is, I think we can still tackle the technical challenge of how do we deliver or deploy a hardware interface, but it's another thing to commit to the contribution model. And what I mean by that is, right now, as we already know, the hardware interface is part of some DIAGs, right? It's actually there. But we're not standing by inviting open contributions to it, because we haven't really publicly said, please contribute to the hardware interface, and we stand by it. And the last thing that I'll say, I'll hand it back to you, Adrian, is obviously there's this hardware management track in OCP that works closely with Redfish. Maybe our next step should be to check in with the hardware management folks. I forget, I think Arun, maybe you're the most plugged in with that group, short of having Dan. I think there are a number of bridges there, but I don't know what's been going on in those tracks. But hopefully that helps, Adrian.
I see Aaron unmuted. If you want to go ahead.
Are you talking about DCMHS?
Yeah, I mean, the larger umbrella around every engagement with the MTF that hardware management has, whether it's OSF or yeah, the DCMHS in general.
Yeah, so my engagement with them only started very recently, towards the end of the last year, and I think we are still spinning up different tracks and groups and things in that the DCMHS realm. So it's very early days of that effort.
So, Vincent, what I would add is that at this point, for practical purposes, I think this discussion of how we fill in that hardware info location bit, even if we haven't specified in the test and validation spec what needs to go in there, I think practically that has become part of the public API that we have in the DIACs here. Because if you think about it, we're maintaining a couple of DIACs and more will join, right? But if they're on the same hardware or on the same topic, it would be very much not ideal to have two different DIACs talking about the GPU or whatever and using different names for it, different hardware locators. And if you want to use both of them, then it's like, okay, this DIAC says this type of location identifier and this one says another one, and you have to create like an internal map to know that they're both the same thing. So, just to make that short, I think we need to deal with this one way or another. If it becomes redfish and we say, okay, that's actually redfish going into that location, or if we have like another way of standardizing that particular field, aka HWI of some sort or another, I think we still need to deal with this.
Yeah, just to I think from an engineering perspective, you have me right along with you there. I completely agree on the sensibility of what you're saying. Practically speaking, I don't know. I actually don't know if that's as essential and as important to sort of the troubleshooting and traceability. there are definitely aspects you're absolutely correct, but I don't know. I may not have the data to sort of say yes, this is a major issue. I think it depends on the scope of the diags and what they touch and how they report back. But I would add though that the hardware interface in my view was always much more than the location identifier. I always looked at it as obviously the location is a critical piece, but I always associate it to truly sort of the almost the operating system abstraction of enumerating hardware, right? And that's
Right.
much greater than the location. But location is very easy handle, right, to the hardware interface, because if we can solve at least for that, maybe we can solve for the rest. And for that, I think, but the location is probably the most well-defined as in Redfish, right? So, and that's why I think you're right to name Redfish, and then we would say, okay, it's Redfish. We're just gonna, and I think that's kind of what we had said initially with the location identifier. We're just gonna use the resource manager of DMTF.
Yeah, so I want to explicitly separate responsibilities here because we should talk about the same thing. What for this discussion, when I've been saying hardware HWI, I am thinking about the location identifier. That is one of the responsibilities. Obviously, it can do other stuff like more in a HAL kind of semantic, access to the hardware, but that's a different responsibility. So in terms of just the location, what I'm saying is I think that kind of becomes part of the public API. But that said, I want to ask for, I don't know, maybe personal opinions because we don't have data for this right now. But the whole point of this project and this group, apart from the collaboration, is to make lives as easy as possible for the end users, which are testing the hardware and using these diags to provide signal in various ways for that hardware, right? So would it be easier right now to just say, okay, we'll take this additional cost of maybe if we have like multiple diags which end up naming things differently, naming the same thing differently. And we need to create like an internal map or whatever to actually say that they're the same thing. Is this preferable right now to having to go into this whole technical discussion on publishing HWI as a system on its own, a black box to generate these kinds of location identifiers uniformly, globally uniformly?
I can see Marcos is about to say something, just about to say something. I'm gonna buy some time. He's gonna jump in, I'm sure. I think ultimately, in my view, this is a question of serviceability, right? So if the output of your diag in the verdict, in the diagnosis, is sufficiently explicit, I think you can name the thing UUID and you'll be fine. I mean, essentially, I think this is a matter of where you're human readable as opposed to assuming that the location identifier is self-explanatory. So if you throw a BDF in there and assume that like, oh yeah, somebody understands that they need to actually swap or reseat at that BDF, then that's a lot of assumption. So in my opinion, this is all about the human readable part is not really going to be the location identifier. It's going to be the what to do and what's told to the human that services the device. That's my take. It wasn't long enough for Marcos to jump in.
No, I really appreciate the question, like, and it triggered thought. So I'm until I have something really like a good opinion one way or the other, I was trying to figure out, because so location is valuable, but I've functioned a lot with serial numbers, right? Like I know that in our data center they're far more concerned with a location. Like they care that it's just go swap DIM7, and not that it's AABBFFGG. That's the bad DIM. In manufacturing, we want to be able to track that DIM and say that DIM is bad. And since we know where we plugged it in, we can then compute it backwards, saying, okay, that serial number is bad. It's the one that's in DIM7, so go swap that one out. But like, I think so long as you have that ability, you have that ability to specify in a way that you can convert or to whatever language your end solution or end customer, right? Like the repair technician or the debug technician at the factory, at the data center, or wherever, like they need that instruction of what is the action I need to take in order to resolve what you have identified. And so that's, I don't, like that is ultimately the thing we need to solve for, and the format on it is I mean, we have everything, probably not, but that's the like kind of where my head's at. But I don't have we should definitely do this sort of opinion yet.
So you're both mentioning the repair use case. This location, in my opinion, should be like the lowest level identifier, the lowest level denominator that can be translated to various other logical names, maybe, for the various use cases. So if you think about a repair scenario where you say, okay, replace DIM7 or replace the DIM with the serial number, whatever, you can have both of those as part of the diagnosis message, rather, but they would materialize as translations of the hardware location. So say you have DIM7 as the hardware location, which is like a non-ambiguous, very deterministic way of identifying the hardware and stable. But when you say, okay, you need to replace DIM7, maybe the technician or whoever is interested in that case specifically wants a serial number, right? So you go and resolve that serial number based on the location identifier that you already have, and you put that into the diagnosis. All right. Well, this has been an interesting discussion. Maybe we should continue it at some point in the future. If you have other opinions, I guess the GitHub discussion on HWI is maybe the right place to put those opinions offline. We're kind of 5 minutes away from the end, so if anyone wants to raise anything, yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, so the spreadsheet that I created, Adrian, do we want to go over that quickly to see is this useful to people?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so let me, so what I did, let me see if I can share my screen. So I've taken the minutes from, or Adrian, can you share the screen there while I'm talking? What I've done is.
What do you want me to share?
The spreadsheet that I created. So I've taken the minutes from the last couple of months, and I've taken all of the links that we have in GitHub in various places, and I've tried to put them into a spreadsheet in a couple of tabs, just to give us like what the minutes document is good for is explaining what we've discussed every week. But what it doesn't give is a good picture of where we are at any moment in time from the OCP test and validation diagnostic program or project. So what I've done is I've tried to put the information in a format maybe that's easy for people to look up if they're looking for current status. For example, if you look at this spreadsheet, it says, well, what diags do we have at the moment? What are the point of contacts? Where are the discussions that have happened? Where can you find the information? So that's one tab. The next one then is we have specification requests that we mention inside in the meetings. And if we want to make sure that we actually agree on what we're going to do with these items, it's good to have these listed somewhere. So if you go to the next tab, I've listed what I've seen as the specification requests, which ones are open, which ones we've actually followed through on the date that they were opened, GitHub discussion. And then there are other action items that come up during the meetings. And I've put a third tab for that. Now, if you feel that this is useful, we can continue and update it. If it's not, we can go back and use the minutes that we have, that we use every week for the meeting. It's your call.
Hey, Karen, yeah, I see value in both. I mean, the meeting minutes are a good timeline for anybody who misses a call and wants to see what may have come up. I know it's not super actively looked at, but I don't know if you were suggesting to replace the meeting minutes. No, okay, perfect. Yeah, then it's great compliment. Yep.
And like, you know, if you do want to copy for yourselves, you can always add extra columns with the metadata you have for your own company, for example, on the right-hand side, but consistently across this meeting that we would use this type of format and add more to the end. Nothing will get deleted from the rows, if this works for you. Okay.
So this is available in the meeting minutes document. If you would add it on the chat here as well, so that people have a link to it separately.
Yeah.
I was also thinking that at least this first page with the status of the diags, we could have a version of this synced to the main OCP diag repo, like in the README. Because there's already a list there with like the diags related to the spec, and you know, having this with like some more detail, maybe it's useful.
No, this is, anyone can update this, you know, it doesn't have to be one person. So anyone on the call that feels that there's something we've discussed can update it. If there's something that happens in between calls, they can also update here for something that's relevant.
Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing this, Karen. All right, so we're on time. Thanks everyone for joining and the good discussion for today, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye.